I think it's incredibly important that the Tokyo conference is focused this year on the theme of liberal international order. It is the topic that is occupying the world, the Western world certainly. My sense is that systems of accountable and inclusive governance are the bedrock for long-term international cooperation. We know that there are many different political systems alive in the world today. We've managed over the last 70 years to build a globalized economy around those different political systems, some of which are liberal and democratic, some of which are authoritarian or have centralized non-democratic forms of control. What is so different about this period now compared to the Cold War era in the latter part of the 20th century is that today we face shared global challenges. Climate change, data management, terrorism, development, energy transitions. In my opinion, none of those challenges can be resolved by just one part of the world without the other. And I recognize that. But we must also recognize that we have very different political systems trying to work towards those common interests. And I am a big believer that we need to find ways not to end up in a new Cold War, a new economic Cold War, where the two systems are split, the liberal and the non-liberal, because we will not be able to confront our common challenges if we are split. But I have to recognize that today, in 2020, we are in a time internationally where two systems of government are trying to coexist. I do believe that in that moment, our job as think tanks, I'll speak for myself, our job as Chatham House, is to make sure that the divisions don't become too stark, that we uphold the values that have enabled us to exist as Chatham House, which are values of liberal democracy, but where we don't try to create this as a wall that then prevents us from having conversation, from cooperating with other systems, and also with think tanks that come from those other systems. And that is the challenge I hope this Tokyo conference can try to break its way through. And is occupying also a lot of the institutions, the think tanks that are gathered here for this conference, not least because all of these think tanks have grown up some way or another in a liberal international system. In fact, the reason I think this is so important is that think tanks themselves are part of liberal internationalism. We are an integral part of civil society, of the ability to question the policies of governments, of being able to communicate competitive ideas from civil society. And so in a way, think tanks themselves are the manifestations, or a manifestation, of liberal order. But it is also a moment where we want to remember the inspiration behind the creation of places like Chatham House and the other think tanks that are gathered here at the Tokyo conference. The only way that the liberal part of the world is able to remain strong at this time of division is, I would argue, starting by making sure that we as countries, as liberal democratic countries, are strong internally. Part of the problem we've had is that in the pursuit of globalization, and by focusing on the global benefits of globalization, whether for our individual countries or for the world as a whole, we've ended up creating divisions and schisms inside our own liberal democratic countries that are now putting them under huge pressure. So a first indispensable step for preserving the liberal part of the world is to make sure that each of those constituent members, whether it's the UK, whether it's Japan, whether it's the United States, European countries, wherever, that we all are focused on getting our own house in order and that they are strong. Now, There are many steps that need to be taken. This is to do with education. This is to do with infrastructure investment. But it's also to do with giving citizens a sense that change is not going to happen too quickly, that change won't happen in a way that exacerbates the bad situation of the losers while simply helping the winners. And I would argue that liberal democratic countries need to think a little bit more about how they also protect their societies from globalization and not simply leave them in the mix in a way that they're unprotected. Now, I think one of the big challenges, a third challenge, is that the United States, which has been the big champion of the liberal order, is going through its own internal transition, is now thinking about how it rebalances winners and losers inside America. And while it does that, it is, because it's the most powerful country in the world, under President Trump at least, it is becoming much more bilateral in its relationships, not multilateral. America first means a more zero-sum approach to international relations. Zero-sum is not what liberal international order is about. That is more about making sure that we all are able to benefit, that we all follow the rules. So there's a big responsibility on governments in Europe, governments in Asia that are liberal, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, to come together and make sure that we protect liberal order collectively, because we benefit the most from a rules-based system. America, unfortunately you might say, can sometimes ignore the rules because it's strong enough. But whether it's Britain, Germany, France, Japan, we're a medium size, we need the rules. So we need to commit to them. Now my last part, my fourth part, this is very important. We must make sure that while we focus more on winners and losers, and that we don't lose the liberal values inside our own countries, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Asia, and especially at a time of social media, a time of insecurity, a time of change, there is a temptation sometimes to forget some of the liberal values inside our own societies. How we protect the media, how we allow civil society to have a strong voice, that think tanks can speak truth to power. This is as important as the liberal order outside our countries. If we're not liberal inside, we won't be liberal outside. We're at the beginning of an intense strategic competition. And I don't think there's anything we can do about that. This is part of the reality of international affairs for the next 10 years, maybe a lot longer. And therefore the core element here is that in that competition, the liberal world needs to be strong. It needs to stick to its values. To the best of our ability, we need to keep the West together in this process. But I fear that by trying to keep the West together against China, we will limit the scope of the West, and we may even limit the cohesion of the West. I would rather we focused on our own strength, defend ourselves against the spread of authoritarian or non-liberal systems of government, including inside our societies, but find ways to at least engage with China, understanding that it may not change. It may be beyond our capacity to make a change, and understanding that there will always be governments out there that may see in China an ally of convenience, even if not a strategic long-term ally. And recognizing at the same time that our liberal system, in my opinion, is the future. That because we are able to have a system of government that empowers individuals, that freedom is stronger than control, we need to just believe and protect in that power for the long term. And if China changes, great. If it doesn't, we're going to have to live with it. I believe our system is the best. I like living in our system, and I would want to help other people live in a Western system as well if they want it, which is why NATO enlargement, EU enlargement, why a rules-based order in Southeast Asia is as important as anywhere. But I don't believe in forcing it, and I don't believe in trying to turn China, into the enemy that we must organize against as our fundamental purpose. The purpose of the West is to serve as an example, as a beacon, that this is best. Look at us. No one wants to leave our system. Even when we disagree as allies. I don't see China with many allies. I don't see Russia with any allies. I don't see people wanting to imitate that system as individuals. I see governments maybe wanting to imitate the Chinese system. I don't see people protesting in the streets saying we want a system like China's system. Let's be confident about our Western system. But let's not be paranoid, about it. Let's be confident about it. Let's protect it. Let's defend it. Let's promote it. But don't build walls in the process. The Tokyo Conference is clearly an opportunity for us to remind ourselves as Western institutions of what we need to do to remain strong at this moment of great uncertainty and transition. So we must commit as a group of institutions that are part of that civil society, part of that free information space that enables democracies to exist. We must commit to protect that separation of powers whenever we see our own governments or governments as part of our community forgetting that commitment and undermining some of those key aspects of what liberal democracies are about. And it is happening. It is happening in democracies around the world. So we must stand up and fight against it. I think we need to also commit to make sure that we help promote sustainable and equitable growth in the future. As think tanks, we've perhaps over-focused on the power of globalization, of market opening, as long as it's rules-based. We must understand that rules need to also leave room for countries to feel sovereign. For democratic societies need to feel that they have an aspect of sovereignty, that they can be proud in their national histories as well, that it is not simply about the liberal democracies just becoming homogenous, part of one big lump. We've got to be intelligent about the differences between our countries, the fact that we need to be sovereign to a certain extent in what we do, and allow for that dialogue to emerge and not simply demand that everyone be exactly the same. As long as we stick to those core rules of what accountable governance are internally, as long as we are sovereign democracies, then we've got to leave a little bit more room, I think, for some of this very difficult dialogue we've heard that is reflected in the election of Donald Trump, that's reflective in Brexit, that's reflective in the different politics we're seeing in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Australia, in Japan. These are contested politics, but we've got to leave room for that as we do it. I think countries that rely on the rule of law, which especially the mid-sized countries, like Japan, like Britain, like Germany, like France, the countries here, we need to make sure that multilateral systems of coordination, of rule writing, of transparency are sustained, because even while some of the big powers like America or others may drift, there needs to be a core of what the rules-based order is in the middle. So how we commit to that will be critical for the future. And I think as a group of institutions that are part of this process, all the more we can do through our work programs, through our agendas, and then getting together in venues like the Tokyo Conference to remind ourselves of what we're committed to, what we believe in, becomes incredibly important. Otherwise, we'll all be split into little pieces. So having these moments where we come together, as we do at the Tokyo Conference, as I hope we do at our London conference at Chatham House in London, as we do at others, need to be moments to commit again to these principles.